and then I'm going to do share. Okay.
Fingers crossed, everyone. Here we go.
Yeah, especially yes. So, okay. So, yes, Shetland. It's called the Island of Islands, and which is a bit self-explanatory as we go through. And it will be a bit of what we had before, plus a bit more, because we've explored more as we've gone on. So I'm going to put a little laser pointer on just in case. So Shetland facts. So just a little bit here. So Shetland is the most northerly part of the British Isles, and it sits at 60 degrees north, and obviously we're at 57. Similar latitude to Oslo, and so I can't read this. I need to get rid of this. Hang on a second. No, I can't do that. So I can't read part of my screen. That's all, because I've got all you on. Just a mere second. This is the learning bit, you see.
Click top left on your little pictures.
Yeah, I can't do that because I've gone on to, oh, there we are.
Yeah, I think if you click on...
Where are we? Pause recording. Right, I'm just going to quickly drop this down a bit. Hang on a second, because I know what I need to do. Anyway, carry on reading that.
I'm reading Shetland facts.
Yeah, because I can't, you think I've got all you up, you see, and I can't.
Yeah, top left of that box
where
you are.
The reason is I've changed to a pointer, so you can see. Can you see my red pointer?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I can't see this bit over here because I've got all you up.
Yes. Well, if you go to the top of that box, okay, you've got the possibility of shrinking that by pushing the negative sign on the left.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that pointer won't allow me to do it.
Okay.
So just give me a sec.
Go back to your cursor then.
Yeah. Let's try that one.
So what do you have a view options?
Right, there we go. That's it. I've got it.
Good. Perfect.
So let's... Okay, we're there.
Good.
Right, that's it. Now I can see it. Yes, so similar to latitude Oslo and St. Petersburg, parts of Alaska and Greenland. So it's closer to Norway than to Aberdeen, and it's as far from London as the Pyrenees. So it puts it in perspective. So Shetland, it's derived from Old Norse words. So you've got Hjotland, Hjolt, has been known as Hetlandis, Hetland, and most recently Zetland. And there's quite a bit of documentation about Zetland.
Sorry, David. David, you start off with Shetland facts. Is that a new word for Shetland?
Shetland facts.
No, at the top, Shetland. I haven't heard that one before. Right at the top, you're heading on that page.
He's picking up a spelling error, Dave.
Oh right, okay, yes. So that's the Shetland tongue.
Great, I thought it was.
Yes. So they've had people living there for about 8,000 years, and it's got some of the finest examples of archaeological sites in Europe, and we'll see some of those. And the most significant would be Jarlshof, and again we'll see that. And there are around 100 brocks for us archaeologists as well. So a few comparisons which are quite interesting. Oh, missed that one, too much. Skye population about 10 to 12,000, population of Shetland about 23. So Shetland covers, the heights, 450 meters for Shetland, the highest point, and Sker Alastair at 993. So it gives you a bit of an understanding of the major differences between Skye and Shetland in terms of traveling around. So Shetland covers 1,468 square kilometres, and Skye is actually bigger at 1,656. The coastline is very different. So Lewis and Harris, 741 miles of coastline. Skye has 456, and Shetland 1,679. And that's why it is actually smaller in sort of dimension, but much, much bigger in the coastline, which is its major advantage, really. And then from Sunborough to the head of Scaw, which is on North Uist, it's about 90 miles, and Skye is about 80-ish, depending on you go by road or just total distance. So again, very similar in some ways, but it's really the coastline that is different. So how to get there? Well, basically, you've only got two options. Sea, and it's a 12-hour journey on the ferry. Very comfortable ferries. They're sort of made for heavy weather, as we've found out on our first trip. Very comfortable, all mod cons, and also by air. You're actually looking at the one above is on the right-hand side is the airstrip. So you actually come in over the sea, and they don't really want to overshoot. And that's the two ways of getting there. So it's one of the reasons we love it. So what does Shetland offer the tourists? So this is what this is sort of based on, really. And the major reason we love it is there aren't many tourists, basically, because you've got to go across the sea or fly to get there. So Shetland has so much sea, land and air space, and that's because of the coastline and the fact it's very, very low. The nature is amazing, wide variety of nature for nature lovers all year round. And of course, you've got archaeology, history, and Vikings. Always Vikings. Vikings are everywhere on Shetland. They have a big affiliation with their history. So, this is the Charlie. So if you're a fan of Shetland, and I know that someone is starting to read Shetland books, and they are the TV series, it's a land of mystery, folklore, intriguing characters, and ghosts. So 6,000 years of archaeology and over 8,000 sites of archaeological sites, which is immense. Now, one of the mysteries is a settlement called Brew or Brow, and it's called a ghost village. They've discovered 4 houses, and it's situated in the southwest of mainland, and it's been buried in sand more than 300 years ago. It's a similar story for a lot of Skye coastline, but it's an interesting story because it just wasn't buried. So we need to dig a little deeper as we go through the presentation. So,
Wow.
The natural features, it's a geopark. The whole of Shetland is a geopark, and they're divided into areas like Skye. And the one on the right-hand side, this one here, is a cave, which is a sea cave, which has collapsed. And this is the other end of it. And the distance between there and here is about 100 meters. So this was a sea cave that came right in about 100 meters, and it's as time's gone on, it's just collapsed. And this is Holm Door, which is one of these islands with stacks and holes in them, and that's the extreme. And this was a good summer's day a few years ago, and very exposed from the sort of northeast side of Shetland. So this is the thing we love most. It's flat, great coastal walking. It's immense, and you can walk everywhere like Scotland, but you haven't got these high, inaccessible coastlines, and loads of beaches, a bit like Orkney. It's a bit like, well, Orkney has the same, the Outer Hebrides, very, very good beaches. And the bottom image is one of our favourite places. And there are lots and lots of islands. So lots to explore. So we have here Fetlar, which is one of the remoter islands at the north. Unst, which is the most northerly island. Yell is the island in between Unst and the mainland. And then you've also got Whalesay, which is midway down on from mainland Shetland. Bres and Nosse is on the southern part, and that's accessible from Lerwick, which is the capital. And it's about a 10-minute ferry when they go about every half an hour. And then at the other side of Bres, you can see this little island called Noss. So we haven't done that one yet. It's a nature reserve, but access to it is by very small inflatable for about 4 people. And it just goes back and forth on request at certain times. We've never managed to catch the weather yet. And then Fula is the most recent island that I've visited. And again, we'll show you a bit of that. And some we haven't visited yet. So Fair Isle, which is in between Orkney and Shetland, very remote, very difficult to get to. Outskerries, which is the most sort of westerly point, and Papastour. And the reason we haven't been to those yet is you can't get there and back in a day easily because of either the scheduling of the ferries or they go into one place and out of the other, but we will get there at some point. So mainland highlands. So mainland is the biggest part of Skye, and Jarlshof is an absolutely stunning site. So they've got buildings dating from 2500 BC to the 17th century, all on one site. And until a few years ago, it remained largely hidden. And they had a storm, so a bit like Skara Brae on Orkney, which was discovered from a storm, and it washed away part of the shore, and they found sort of evidence of ancient buildings. So this is what it looked like before the storm. So there's this building here, and there's a sort of a newer church building at some point. And this is the seaside of the coastline, and just the other side of this building was where they saw the remains of some buildings which started them excavating. And what they found, so if you can imagine this area here with a nice grassy area leading up to the old clan house, was this. So this is the earliest houses, and there was a very, very large village there, very well maintained, and the structures are intact. There's got things like the quern stones here, and a representation above. So it's a very good indication of how that would have evolved from the earliest points on the right through to the slightly later ones on the left-hand side of this area of the site. It developed through to the Bronze Age, where they found evidence of a smithy. And there are plunge pools here. And it's just developed. And you can see the differences in the way that they've made the construction of them changes over the site as well. the advantage here is that they have an audio tour, so they actually give you an audio guide around the site, which is really interesting, and it just makes you look, and they make you aware of all the different aspects to it as well. And then we have this major Brock site here. So the area of the shore here that you see is where the remains of these outer buildings were discovered. So that's the shoreline. And it shows that this structure was one complete structure at a certain point. And it's certainly something Christine and I have never seen before. We've seen Brocks, and we all know those, but this structure here is very different from anything we've seen. And again, this evolved over a large number of years with them being added on. And this is a bit of detail into, again, the structures that they have in these. And obviously, you're always getting tourists in the picture as well as you wander around. So that was the one tourist that was around on this point in time that we were there. So you get them to yourself very nearly. But it's a standard sort of Brock construction. And it just shows, you can imagine if you've seen the Brocks on Skye, very different, because we tend to have large blocks, but they're using the blocks that they have here, which are the smaller ones and easily splittable. So that's how they built it. And then this is the other side of the Brocks here. So the Brock themselves are on the other side. And this is a further development as time went on. And again, it's the first instance we've ever seen of a wheelhouse. So it's a circular house and divided into chambers. So if you can imagine that the hole in the ground here is this entrance, which is the second on the right, and this one is the first entrance. This is a sort of a panorama all the way round. So this, if you can imagine that as a circle, you can see the size is indicated here. And the development of these inner walls is sort of very clear. So we were quite amazed when we saw it, because we've never seen anything quite like that. And Shetland just continues to surprise, really. And then looking out more inland, we've got the Norse settlement. So hundreds of years later, the Norse came and they used this area, and a lot of the Brocks and things would have disappeared or been covered over. So they've built slightly inland from those, and there's quite a long area of long houses that we have here. And we also have slightly farther down the medieval farmhouse, which again is a big development, and there was a brew house here, which again is fully exposed. So you can see again the extent of the site here. And this is on the right hand side, you've got Shetland hotel, very well known on the Shetland TV series. It's not the access point to the site. The site has its own access, but it's very handy because you can use their toilets. And this is a video taken from the top of the tower. So again, you can see Sunborough Hotel here. So I'm just going to play this, and then you'll see the extent of the actual site itself. So overall, it's fairly compact, but it was obviously a very popular site. because so many people over the generations have actually used it, found it suitable. So there we can see the actual Brock site from above, which gives you a good indication again of the wheelhouse construction and how the other buildings are sort of linked together with it. And this was the area that was discovered first. And this is the wheelhouse itself. Very complex construction. And then we see the Viking area here with the longhouses. Again, quite an extensive range of buildings. Quite a large village, and then down to the medieval village on this side back, and then back to the main clan house. So it's a superb site overall. And then about a mile down the road, you have another site, which is the Scatness Brock site and wheelhouse. So again, we see exactly the same structure here that they had at Jarlshof. And this site is run by a voluntary group, and they have guest archaeologists coming, and you can go in, they'll actually give you a tour, show you what they're doing. And this has been going on for quite a number of years. And again, you can, it's a very, very inexpensive place to go. They've excavated this to, again, a good level, so you can actually wander around and see. And again, we're seeing the same structures here with the pit and the wheelhouse structure. And they've also done an educational site where they have school children and groups in to give them a view of the sort of the living experience of a roundhouse. And it's right next door to the airport. So again, I think they've found a lot of this when they were actually starting to survey that site. And then right opposite, on the other side of the bay, there's this, which is, it's called the Ness of Bergi. And they actually have no idea what it was used for. They're considering it to be a blockhouse. This is sort of a representation of it and what remains. And you see it looks fairly complete. And inside of this, there are two oval rooms, one here and one here. But they say they really haven't got an idea of whether it was just a remote outpost for keeping an eye on the coast invaders. But as I say, it's about 2,000 years ago again. But again, a structure that Christy and I've never noticed before. And then this may be just the remains or the footings of a house. But again, that's what what remains of that. So, having looked at the archaeology of that, we come back to the mystery of Brew, the ghost village. So they found that from a representation of a 1600 map, Dutch map, it was one of the richest estates in Shetland. But by 1730, it had been abandoned because it had been engulfed by sand. So they think that probably the introduction of sheep grazing and grass-eating rabbits may well have impacted on the landscape. And it said they've found evidence that they've had sort of sandstorms and sand incursion for hundreds of years. And then they had little ice age, which created fierce winds, and that ultimately doomed it when it was engulfed in sand. But again, very good excavation there, and it's quite an extensive site, but only 4 buildings. So, but it continued because once it got covered over, sometime later, I'm not quite sure when, they found that whilst excavating, someone had come and reused it. And they'd excavated into the building from above, created a living space inside, making a stairway, and they formed a dwelling underneath the sand dunes. So the ghost village came to life again very briefly before it was abandoned again. And so they don't really know who may have liked to live, as they say, like rabbits in a sandy hole. But again, they think it must have been a good site to have had a value for someone. So we'll continue investigating that as we go through. And our favourite place, St Ninian's Isle. It's a tombolo, and it's the largest in the UK, and it's only very rarely does it get covered. So very high tides and storms will cover it, but it normally remains like that all year. So we're on mainland Shetland from the way the photograph is taken, and then we have St Ninian's Isle itself here, which is beautiful, rocky island, very low and easy walking, probably about 2.5 hour walk all the way around the coast. And as you come back, or just up here, in this area here, they have St Ninian's Chapel. And this, again, is a very, very old building. But most significantly is this post, which is in the middle of the aisle. It was often wondered why it was there. Some thought maybe it had just been a burial site, but they decided to excavate it just to see what it might be. And it turned out that it was a treasure hoard. So the 12th century chapel, and underneath they found silver and silver gilt objects made during the second half of the 8th century. So they think they're probably Viking, and they have the replicas of these in the Shetland Museum, and I think they are actually at the moment in one of the main museums in Edinburgh, I believe. But it's obviously a very, very significant find, and that it survived for so long without being discovered or robbed is quite amazing. And another feature of certainly the Northern Isles, I've never seen these in Scotland, but then we've probably not really looked at them. These are huckster mills right on the coast. And we found lots of instances of this type of construction. Again, just by local walking around the coast, traveling around. And once you can identify sort of where they are and the sort of what to look out for. They're fairly easy to spot. And they were used for grinding corn. Have been seen to be sort of from the Viking times to the beginning of the 20th century. And there's certainly some that you really can see that have been used sort of very recently in the community, all community-based mills for local areas. And the construction is sort of fairly straightforward. This is a series of 3 mills, and you have the sort of the water courses running through each and flowing down and out to the sea. And they're horizontal mills because they're set horizontally rather than vertically, is more like the ones that we usually associate with. So this is the sort of the construction that brings the water in and down through the hole in the bottom. And they're called Norse mills or click mills. And the construction of the actually the millstone and the turning mechanism has given them the name click mills. This is a millstone knocking stick, which clicks. And they've created sort of a reconstruction of what they're like inside the bottom one of these. This was done by a local chap and shows really well how they work and how effective they were. So very simple, water across, driving the wheel and up to the quernstone and the millstone. So you think if they've had 3 of those in an area, the grain must have been fairly common for them to sort of create those and you know, having them and being able to use them really. The jewel in the crown. So again, another famous site, and again, one of our favorites. So the Broch of Musa. It stands 13 meters high and just is so impressive. And they thought it would have been constructed around about 100 BC. It's small in comparison to some of the others that we know. So smallest overall dimension, but it's got one of the thickest bases and the smallest interiors. Now to get there, you can have to go by boat, very small boat, and you get a maximum of 60 people each trip. I think the most they usually take is about 45. And you get to be on the island with 45 other people. And then they leave and then another 45 come in. So it's quite unique in that. If you think that was on Skye, what that would be like, doesn't bear thinking about really. In addition, it's an RSPB nature site. And they have people that stay there during the summer, and it's monitored. And they have to ensure that you don't get predators coming in on the single boat that comes over, and they're also checking that because it's a popular mooring spot, particularly with some of the tour boats that sometimes come in, although it's very difficult to get to. And they have a very large population of ground nesting birds, and of course if you get rats and things in there, it would be not be very good for them at all really. So the Broch itself, as I say, it's very, very impressive. So this was it looking from the boat just as we go onto the island. And we have Christine there as a scale model. So you can see it's the most complete Broch there is. And intriguingly, on the other side of the water here on the mainland, Shetland is another one. So there would have been a pair of these, but the other one is actually down at ground level. And that's, the stone has been removed because this was an area where people lived, and more people, so that was robbed for the houses there. But on Musa, you didn't really have a huge population, so it's managed to stay intact, and all the better for it, really. So a couple of videos just to give you an indication and an impression of what it's like. Now, the first little bit's a bit wobbly because I've got a head cam on, so just bear that in mind as we sort of look at this. You see in the pink here, our tour guide is just waiting for us to go in, and it's normally the door is normally kept locked because they have sheep and wildlife on, so they're trying to keep those out. But it's the structure itself is again a bit like the one that we've got in Jarlshof, and a little bit more like some of the ones we've got in Skye with rather larger boulders, but still quite different. You can see different levels. There's 2 rooms on the right hand side through the wall, so it's a much thicker wall that allows that to happen. And then inside, to say, you've got virtually complete, and each of the little holes you see at the bottom are again small rooms, either for storage or can be for living areas of construction. There's possibility, I think, that there may have been, additional floor, which is the construction that seems to indicate that. As you say, seriously impressive. And then just to give you an idea of the inside and what it's like at the top, we have this one. So the access from the floor here, we'll get a bit of an idea of the floor area here. It's just a matter of, because at the floor level, I'm not quite sure how it would have worked, but this is a sort of a ramp up to it, really. So at the entrance to the Brock, you actually get torches. They've actually got a cupboard with torches in, but it's always recommended, if you go, that you take your own, as powerful as possible, because it's very black in here. And you can see the sort of the depth of some of the chambers inside. And the first set of steps take us up to the sort of the first level. And these are very narrow steps. I mean, you have to put your toes on them, really. You can't get a full foot on, so hence the guide rail. And as you look down, you can see the actual floor structure there. But it actually takes your breath away. I think it's survived for so long in this condition. And as you can imagine, getting up and down is a little difficult, but then you don't get that many people in all at once, because you can actually walk around Musa about an hour and a half. So some people go straight to the Brock, and others will walk around it. So you get there at different times, really. And it's just a place to sit and wander anyway. But so this is the view from the top, and they think there's probably about another 3 meters on the top of this. So it's almost totally complete. You can see the mainland on the left-hand side as we look out, and the extent of u3a itself. There's certain areas you can't walk during the breeding season because it's, again, the ground nesting birds have protection. So the ferry actually comes from over this side over here, Sandwich, and the other brock is on this side, just over here, the remains of it. So you get about, I suppose, about 3 to 4 hours over, for each visit, and it's more than enough. But it's just, and we've been several times. It's a place you just go back to, really. And the other thing about u3a brock, it's a breeding colony for European storm petrels. And you only see these after dark, but you can actually hear them by putting your ears in the wall. And they say the island holds about 6,800 breeding pairs. So it's a huge site, and there may be about 4,000 pairs actually breeding inside the walls of the brock. So if you go into one of the holes in the brock itself, where it's completely dark, and if it's quiet, you can actually hear them talking to each other. So one bird stays in the brock, and the other one goes out hunting, and they may stay there for 48 hours, even longer, before the other one comes back with the food. And then they call to each other through the walls, which is how they know where they are. And they come in about midnight. And the reason they come in at midnight is that there are no predators about. So the skuas, who are their main predators, don't fly at night. So it makes it fairly safe for them to come in. And they come to the brock and they circle. And then they will go to a point on the side of the walls and hang on, listening for their mate, and then they'll just disappear into the middle. So I went there on midnight on Midsummer's Eve. They do a midnight boat trip, and I have to say it was one of the best wildlife spectacles I've ever seen. It was just stunning. And we actually managed to get to hold one of the birds because it actually bumped into someone as they were swooping around. So we just managed to check it was okay, and then just released it. But it was a wonderful sight, and the sounds were just lovely. So that was an excellent sight. So then moving on to some of the islands, just a very quick fly around the islands. So Whalesay is halfway up on mainland, and it's about a 20-25 minute ferry, regular ferry. They tend not to have the problems we have down at Armadale with tides or anything. They're fairly robust ferries. And the ferry price is the same right the way across the island. It's one price, and you book in advance or you just turn up. Very, very good. And again, because of the lack of people, you can normally get on any one that you want to, really. So that's the best thing about it. So Shetland was a major, major site for fishing industry, mainly cod. And the Germans came and created a lot of trading places where the fish was landed and processed and then shipped out again. And the German Hanseatic League was established, and they created these buildings, which are called bods. So it's a trading booth. This one here on Walesay is a museum, and it gives a good indication of what they did and tells about it. And then the arrangement lasted from 1400 to 1700 and was very, very profitable. They had a lot of very big buildings built over that time from the profits. And then Scotland decided to be independent. So from 1700 onwards, they decided, well, why is all this money going out? We're going to have it ourselves. And from that point, the industry collapsed. They just didn't have the organisation. They couldn't support it, didn't have the commercial knowledge on how to do it. So it deteriorated over the years. And then finally, the loss of the fish meant it's down to its levels now. So again, maybe a lesson for the future, but we're not going there. But again, quite a small island, and it has the most northwesterly golf course on Walesay as well, which is a very, very nice one. We walked all across that, it's lovely. And then we have Yell. Now Yell is in the north of Shetland, and it's in between the mainland and Unst. It's the least interesting of the islands. It doesn't have a lot of character, but has certain really nice coastline. And the white wife of which is a figurehead. So it's on the coast, and it represents a German cadet training ship, the Bohus, and it sank there in April 1924. It was a cadet training ship, and they lost 4 lives. And this was put there as a sort of a memory of that wreck. And all across Yell are these buildings, the little sort of outcrops here, and they're called planticrubs. Again, a bit of a unique feature of Shetland. You see them everywhere, and because again there's not much fertile land, certainly as you go farther north, they created these, much as they did our raised beds on Skye and across Scotland, to cultivate kale, which they use as a sort of a food for themselves, and mainly food for the animals. Again, very low island, and you have to cross this to get to Uist, which is the island on the horizon here. Again, it's about a 10-minute crossing, very regular. And the crossing from Yell to Unst is free, because you can't get to Unst unless you cross Yell. So the ferry price is for 2 ferry crossings. And so coming backwards and forwards from Unst is a free one. So that's quite worth knowing. And Unst itself, Unst is a lovely island. We spent a week there a couple of times. Really like it. Again, really big history, lovely coastline. And they have this at the top end of the island, which is a Viking longhouse reconstruction. They built it for education, so there's a lot of class trips and educational tours that come here. So it's the most northerly island in Britain, and first footfall of the Vikings in the North Atlantic, and you can see why. It's sort of straight across, really. And would be on the first place they would have found and inhabited. and so there's at least 60 longhouses. It's the highest density of really rural Viking sites anywhere, including Scandinavia. So obviously it was one to their liking and one that they could explore from. And right next door is the Skidbladner. Now this was built as a replica in Gokstad. It was the design from a Viking burial, which they'd found at Gokstad, and they reconstructed it in about late 1990s. They equipped it and decided they would try and recreate the sail from Gokstad through to America. That was their plan. Unfortunately, they got as far as Shetland and had to abandon it because it started leaking. So here it was left, and it was left to the Shetland Islanders as a thank you for their welcome and help. And it's now sort of quite a good tourist attraction. So they've sort of rebuilt it, and they're actually continuing to. They want to put some masts up. So over the years, they've sort of improved it. But it's quite a good reminder of what the Vikings would have arrived in, really. And it's quite a large vessel, as you can see. So, Unst. So the white building with Christine outside is where we should have been this year. So this is it's just by Norwich Beach, which is the image below. And we've already booked in for next year. We were supposed to have been 2 weeks this year, but hopefully we'll get there next year if all is well. Again, you can see the coastline. It's all walkable. Lots of little headlands and history on, and slightly sort of west of here, we reach the most northerly point on the British Isles and the most northerly point of the national cycle route. It's a place called Score, and this is where the road ends in the British Isles, really. As you can see, so 1695 Wales away from Dover. Lovely beach and a lovely walking headland. And again, very rarely do you see many more cars there than two. So it's just shows really that people who do come know what they're looking for, but there's not many of them. And down below is one of the best things on Unst in terms of history, which is the Heritage Boat Museum. It's superbly done, lots of history, lots of items to browse, very helpful staff, always happy to talk and chat to give you information, lots of archives, photographs, and it's very cleverly designed. So the boats themselves are on shingle. So it's designed to look as though they're pulled up on a seashore. And at each end, you've got a mirror, very large mirror. So as you walk in, it looks as though it stretches for 3 times farther than it actually does. All very, very well preserved. So it's again, I think it's something like about £2.50 to get in. And right outside it, there's Victoria's tea room, which is a Cotswold type tea room on the northern part of Unst. Very quaint and twee, but the cakes are to die for. So again, it's a spot we go, and it's also a very good spot to get Wi-Fi. And going through to nature, our first orca sighting was from Unst in 2018. So we've been looking for them for a few years, never managed to catch them. They have a very good nature network on Unst. called Orca Watch and Wildlife on Shetland, which you can check and see what arrives on the day and where it is. So this first one with the boat is the first sighting we had, and we actually followed them around for about an hour before they came into the area here, which was sort of closest to us. And this is the Unst to Yell ferry coming from Yell. And I don't know if you can think, you could probably see this happening in on the Armadale ferry. There's a pod of 3. The main male orca here, plus 2 others. And they went through the sound between Yell and Unst, and the ferry stopped in the water to watch them go past, and then followed them for half a mile, 2 miles up the sound, just to give the people on board a really good sighting, and they came back to pick us up on the other side. So I don't really think that if they saw those going across in front of them from Mallaig, they'd actually do that. But it's quite interesting that that's the way they view things over there. And then last year, we had our first major sighting, really close-up sightings. So this was Buster, the very famous orca, the same as we have 2 well-known male orcas around Skye over the last sort of 18 months. They have about 3 main pods that circulate between here and Iceland and various other locations. So they record them quite easily. They record the fin nicks, the body nicks, and the colours, so they know exactly who it is. And this is Buster's pod, and they actually had quite a small youngster with them as well, which would have been last year's newborn. And we followed those probably for about 3 to 4 hours on the mainland, going to various different sites, and you get quite a little convoy of about 20 cars following them around. Lots of nature photographers and nature guides do this as a living, so they'll have minibuses and they gear themselves up to finding them when they're around, and they'll go from one end of Shetland to the other just to see them. But it's well worth it. It's superbly done. And again, the space means you don't get lots of crowds. So it's a wonderful experience. And we were supposed to be seeing humpbacks this year. That was our main objective for going, but we have to miss them this year. And there were loads around when we were there. So hopefully next time. And then Fetlar. So Fetlar is the island that's in between, or just to the side of Unst and Yell, and you can get to it through the same ferry that goes between Unst or Yell. There are 2 ferries that go between Unst and Yell, and one of them takes a detour across to Fetlar, probably about 3 times a day. It's quite small. It hasn't got an awful lot of population, probably less than 100. It's a very nice island, but not so accessible as some of them, as some of the farmers have actually blocked some off. They don't let people in. And one of the things you do see everywhere on Shetland is terns, Arctic terns. They breed everywhere. There's a big migration in the summer, and they are very aggressive. This one here, we're walking back to the ferry, and this one was actually had a nest on the side of the road here. And as we were walking past, she'd suddenly go up onto one of the lampposts and then dive bomb you as you came, screaming as you go. So Christine had her hat on to protect herself. And you have to duck. They can give you a nasty nip. And because it's a geopark, you'll see these again around quite a lot. It's a representation of the stone and the layout of the the geology on the islands, and each of the areas have their own little ones, which is quite interesting to see. But one of the main reasons to come to Fetlar is for this bird. It's a red-necked pharaoh, and it's comes to Fetlar to breed, and it's one of the best breeding sites and breeding colonies in the UK. And you can only see them at certain times. They're quite small, and this was sort of a photo I took of the red-necked pharaoh while we were there, which I really didn't realise I had, because I took I heard the sound of one, and I just took some blind photos, and it was only when I got home and zoomed in and checked them out I realised that I'd actually captured one. So it's a record shot, so I can actually claim to have seen one. But there's a loch that they breed on that attracts nature watchers, and that's the best place to see them. So, and then down below is quite an unusual building for quite a small island. So this is it's Brough Lodge, and it was built in 1825 by Arthur Nicholson, who owned the island at the time. So he was the laird, and the last person to leave was the last Lady Nicholson, and it was abandoned in 1970. She was only living in a small part of it. But they've set up a trust to try and help restore it and maintain it, at least in its current position. So you can see there's some building work going on just to try and maintain it. And the tower that you see is actually a folly, something we see, a lot, certainly in sort of England, and there's a few up here, but it's quite a significantly large one. And it's on the highest point of the island, and it was used as an astronomical observatory for a period of time. And it's on the actual site of an old broch. There's an old broch underneath there. And then the last of the islands that we visited is Fula. Well, I've visited. Unfortunately, Christine didn't fancy it. This was going on the boat over, so it only takes about 8 to 10 people. And it's not a ferry, but this is a tour boat. He's a fisherman for most of his time, but he actually takes people across. It's about 2.5 hours from the mainland, and it was a pretty rough and bouncy day, so you can see how we're wrapped up. This was just after midsummer. And the island itself is quite unusual. All the habitation is on the one side, and again, there probably maybe 100 properties that are there, completely self-sufficient. It's a bit like St Kilda. He has his own breed of sheep. This is the Fula sheep. And they are very, very careful not to interbreed. So they're a pure breed, and their wool is quite coarse. It's heavyweight, so it actually makes good weatherproofing heavyweight wool, which is quite well sought after. The area where the buildings are is quite low. And you can see from the contours here, the rest of it is very high. And there are, again, a number of quite outstanding geological areas. So this is where we land on the pier, and there's one road. So it just goes up and down. And when I went there, you get about 4 hours there. And at the time we went, the person that lived up here, one of the last houses, offers meals. So you get taken up there for a meal, which you have to choose beforehand. And one of the options is lobster. And as we came in to the pier, we met the chap coming in on his boat, and he just collected the lobsters that they were cooking for lunch. I decided to stick with my sandwiches, so I gave that a miss. But it was something, again, that was quite nice for the sort of the people to make a little bit of money from. So I walked right the way up to the top here, up to Garda Stack. Quite interesting things I saw on the way. So because it's so remote, cars come on, but they don't go off. So this is just a place where they bring all their old vehicles. They'll reuse bits and adapt vehicles and keep them going as long as they can, just to sort of maintain what they've got, but they can't take them anywhere else, so they just leave them. So this is a Garda Stack here. Again, another one of these superb geological structures with a hole right through the middle. It's lovely. Now, I don't know if you can just pick out on the horizon here. This is a fog bank which we came through as we travelled over, and it encircled the island completely and covered it when we arrived. And as I walked northwards, it suddenly cleared from this area and had a gorgeous sort of walk up in the sunshine, while the bottom of the island stayed in this very low mist, and it was quite cold as you walk through. And because they're self-sufficient, peat is a big major factor on Fula. It's a community business. There are huge stacks. Quite interesting, again, how they pull theirs out and how they stack them. And these are long, sloping ones, rather we tend to have the squat, thicker ones. This is the school and the community centre. And they have installed fairly recently, probably about 10 years ago, or probably a little bit more recent, a huge block of solar panels which provides their electrical energy. There is one smallish wind turbine, but this is the major thing. They have battery stock-ups, and they use oil and obviously the peat for cooking, heating, and whatever they can. They recently, while we were there, put an advert out for a new teacher. The head teacher was retiring, and we had a quick look at the spec for the teacher, and there was a page of what the teacher was required, which covered all the educational things, and all the next page was about the things that they would be expected to do while they were there as well. So they have a house allocated. They're looking for a family, and then the family would take part and be giving specific tasks. So they would be helping with the peat cutting, they'd be helping with the sheep shearing and rounding up of sheep, and they were actually sort of put in the job description so that there was no hiding away. If you were coming out there, you know, you became part of the community very, very quickly. And as I say, it's what the community relies on. There's only one ferry a day, and sometimes the weather is so bad they can't get out. So they can go for a week, maybe longer sometimes, without actually having supplies. So one of the major things we mentioned earlier that we love was the wildlife. And no matter where you go, you see it everywhere. They aren't afraid of anything. They're happy for you to be around. And we've seen a lot of firsts here. So things we've never seen before. So this fella, he is a mustachioed seal. You'd think there's actually a bearded seal. So you really would want him to be a mustachioed seal, but it's probably a bit of a mouthful. They called him a bearded seal. And he stayed around for about 6 weeks. And we had our fingers crossed that he'd still be there when we arrived. It was the first thing we went to see as we travelled from the ferry into Lerwick. And he was actually, every day he would come and rest on this point, which was a jetty in the middle of Lerwick Harbour. And people were just walking around. They weren't allowed to go actually close to him. It was a protected area. But the walkway and the promenade was just above. And his scientific name is Eriganathus barbatus. And it comes from Greek words eri and nathos, which means heavy jawed, and barbarous, which refers to the whiskers or the beard. And they live in the Arctic, Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. So it's travelled a long way, and this one was a female. And as I say, she probably was quite old, but you think, how far she would have travelled and why she thought that it was quite nice to be here. So obviously a food source is good, but it was a lovely experience, and we were quite lucky because Megan and Ian were coming to join us for this sort of the last period of the holiday, and they managed to see her as well. So that was quite nice. And the other things that we've seen, which you've never seen before, was our first snow goose, which happened to be around for about a day and a half. So we very quickly went to Sombra Head, which is a big lighthouse site, which is one of the first landfalls. And that was there for just a little while, so we managed to catch her. And the little wren here is a Musa wren. It says its own breed of wren on Musa. And there is also a Shetland wren, which is a little different. So it's quite surprising. There's 2 different species of wren. We also managed over 2 years to see cranes. So this is the common crane, and they're hoping that the pair that we saw last year may well start breeding. They've been around now for a couple of years. Lovely birds. And Shetland also has its own bee. So this is the Shetland bee, which again is quite a unique bee. And because of its remoteness, you say that's why you have these, a bit like St Kilda. Migrants, again, one of the big things about Shetland is its position means they get lots of winds, both east and west, coming across from the continent and from the Americas. And every year they get, I wouldn't say hundreds, but 40s, 50s sightings of different migrants, and some of them are sort of quite rare. You have shrikes. This is a red-backed. They have about 5 different ones of these. And if you don't know a shrike, never heard of them, they're quite a bloodthirsty bird. They actually catch insects, but don't necessarily eat them straight away. They take them and impale them on thorns, like hawthorns. Just leave them there and then come back to them later. So they're a bit like squirrels, really, but a bit more bloodthirsty. And no guessing for what this one is. It's a blue throat. Again, they had a few of these over the years. Quite a distinctive bird. And this is a black-necked grebe. So they have Slavonian grebes, great crested grebes, and little grebes, which we have seen on Skye. But this is a black-necked, which I don't think we've had here. And they have lots and lots of different types of warblers, some of them which are actually tiny. This one's an eastern subalpine warbler. Very distinctive again. Initially, someone passing would probably think it's a robin, but again, quite small bird. And again, because of these, it attracts a lot of autumn and winter wildlife enthusiasts. And more here, so you've got a barred warbler, and some of them look identical, but bird watchers seem to know just how different they are. So it can be one feather or the width of a tail. A wryneck, which is a very strange bird, normally only seen at night. And I think this is only about the second time they'd seen them on Shetland. Surf scooter. So we have common scooters here. We actually had a velvet scooter, which is the other of this breed on Loch Harport a few years ago, which was the first on Skye. And the yellow-browed warbler. So, and again, there's been lots of these. And this year, they've had quite a rare one. This is a very rare bird from Siberia. So Siberian red throat. So it comes from Siberia, as the name suggests. Nests near the ground, and it winters in Thailand, India, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. So you think to yourself, how on earth does it get over here? And it stayed around for a fair amount of time. And then this one here is the owl is a mega rare Tengemans owl. And this thing is tiny. So it's 22 to 27 centimeters long. And it was the first sighting on Shetland since 1912. So it's got a 50 to 62 centimeter wingspan. It comes from North America, where it's known as a boreal owl. And it stayed around, luckily, in the same place in someone's garden for about 4 weeks. It got on national television. There's some really nice videos of it being taken. I think the people whose garden it stayed in made quite a good bit of money out of supplying teas and coffees for the twitchers. And hot off the presses, well, it was on Facebook. So 29th of September, which is when I sort of put the main presentation together. There's been about 12 new migrants on since then. But this is the first Tennessee warbler, which was the first on Shetland. So they have them on Fair Isle, but this is the first on the mainland, Shetland, which is quite significantly different. So Tennessee warbler. So the Siberian red throat obviously gives it a bit of a clue. It says Tennessee warbler, so you'd think, wouldn't you, that it comes from Tennessee? But actually, it's never bred in Tennessee and doesn't live there now either. But it's named from a specimen that someone collected in 1811 and just happened to have found it on the Cumberland River while it was on migration. So a bit misleading, but again, very, very small bird. So, Brew, the ghost village. So maybe this is going to get a bit clearer now. So we've done the investigation. So whatever caused Brew or Brow to be buried also buried the Neardale-Kendale community, which is about 1.2 miles from the sea. And the findings they've come to is that the effects of climate change of this, what they call the Little Ice Age, 1645 to 1715, and the temperature was sort of 2.1, 3.6 Fahrenheit, cooler than it is today at its sort of lowest points. And they ran a computer model of the island's topography through a wind simulation and found that the area around Brew, the wind speed drops off dramatically. So you get a wind up, which will raise the sand, and suddenly if it drops, the sand drops out of the sky, which is hence the reason for things getting covered up so quickly. So it's sort of quite an interesting development. And this is the 1654 map, which here shows Brow or Brew and Kendale. But if you actually look at the area where the excavation is, and this was one of the photographs we saw before, this is Kendale Farm and Kendale Mill, which is a museum now, which is well worth a visit. You can see here a lock, and if you look down here where the Brow is shown on this 1654 map, it's a long way from the sea, and this water here is not this, because this is just it's a lock that's been excavated for irrigating the farm. So Kendale currently is the village here, and Kendale is at this point you can see on the map, and this is Kendale Bay. So this is the direction of the wind. So the location of Brew, as they've named it, is completely different from how it's shown here. And if you think that this is the location of the excavation, the coast is about 500 meters from the farm. So it's quite feasible that that's where the sand will come from, and quite easily would have covered it, because this is all a very sandy based ground here. So the sort of the location here and Kendale is obviously either moved as people have moved location, or it's just been misinterpreted, which is quite possible. So as we come to the end, no one can forget the favourites. So there are Shetland ponies everywhere on Shetland, and they're gorgeous. They breed them, they show them, and they export them. And it's just lovely to see them. So that's it, that's me done. Thank you very much. So as I say, we'll stop that now, and any questions you want to ask, comments, just please do so.
Can I
That's
just,
lovely,
yeah,
David.